Welcome back to the France 24 debate. Today we're talking about Facebook, the social media giant, which began this week by announcing more than $9 billion in quarterly profits on Monday. That's an increase of about 17%. Facebook also announced that it now has around 3 billion users. But not all is well on the Facebook front. Mark Zuckerberg's platform has been facing a deluge of scathing reports. In fact, in recent weeks, hardly a day has gone by when Facebook hasn't been in the headlines, and for all the wrong reasons, whether it's been whistleblowers coming forward accusing the company of prioritizing growth over users' safety, accusations that Facebook bends to the will of state censors in some countries, allowing hate speech to flourish in other countries, ignoring fake accounts that undermine elections, allowing anti-vaccine messages to mushroom, or allowing its algorithm to fuel toxic polarization online. And then there's the fact that moving forward, Facebook is going to struggle to maintain growth in numbers of users because teenagers are increasingly turning their backs on the platform. Well, let's kick off by listening to what one Facebook whistleblower and witness, Frances Haugen, told Congress earlier this month.
Facebook wants you to believe that the problems we're talking about are unsolvable. They want you to believe in false choices. They want you to believe that you must choose between a Facebook full of divisive and extreme content or losing one of the most important values our country was founded upon, free speech. That you must choose between public oversight of Facebook's choices and your personal privacy. That to be able to share fun photos of your kids with old friends, you must also be inundated with anger-driven virality. They want you to believe that this is just part of the deal. I am here today to tell you that's not true.
Okay, the Facebook whistleblower speaking to Congress earlier this month. So despite all this negative publicity, how is Facebook still managing to grow profits? Is its future profitability sustainable? Can Facebook be reined in? And whose responsibility is it to regulate this and other social media giants? Those are some of the questions I'll be putting to our panel today. With us here in the studio, I'm joined by the Secretary General of the Institute of Digital Sovereignty, Bernard Benhamou. Welcome to you.
Welcome.
I don't usually do this. I'm going to do this for everyone, actually, today. Can I just ask you to say in 10 seconds, if you will, roughly what it is you bring to the table?
I've been working for a long time for government in internet regulation. I was at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs at the UN Summit, the Sherpa, as we call, for the French ambassador to the UN for the regulation of the internet. I was, after that, a ministerial delegate for internet at the Ministry of Research. And I'm currently, as you have mentioned kindly, the head of the Internet, the Digital Sovereignty Institute, which is dealing with international issues relating to the Internet.
Okay, so a wealth of experience. Thank you very much indeed, Bernard Benhamou. We'll be speaking to you in a moment. I'm also joined here in the studio by entrepreneur and teacher Fabrice Epelmois. Fabrice, welcome to you. Same for you. Could you just tell us a little bit about what you bring to the table?
So I've been using Facebook for various purposes and been studying for the past 10 years the way you can use Facebook for political reasons, especially for the renewal of propaganda, what is usually called astroturfing, and been heavily studying stuff like Cambridge Analytica. I've also been heavily involved in the Tunisian revolution, who has been heavily using Facebook. So I know quite a bit about the way you can use Facebook to do politics and the way you can do this in a very evil manner.
Certainly sounds like there's potential there. From London, we're joined by Alison Stewart-Allen, who's a marketing and branding expert at International Marketing Partners. Thank you so much for joining us. Could I ask you to briefly introduce yourself in 10 seconds?
Sure. So I'm the co-author of a book called Working with Americans, and I'm an expert on the American business culture. And I help companies grow internationally, but especially try to help companies crack the U.S. market.
Okay, well, thank you so much for introducing yourself. Last but not least, we can go to New York and speak to Stephen Rosenbaum, Executive Director of the New York City Media Lab. Thank you so much for joining us, Stephen. Could you introduce yourself as well?
Absolutely. So the NYC Media Lab sits in this very interesting spot. We have big tech partners and members, and we also have media companies. And I've spent the last 25 years actively involved in building companies that create web media. That being said, I've also done quite a bit of business with Facebook, and I've written 2 books on curation, and have been involved in the early days of what used to be called user-generated media and is now called social media.
Thank you very much indeed, Stephen. Thank you. And thank you to all of you for introducing yourself. Let's get started. We started the week with Facebook announcing its quarterly results, a 17% increase in profit. Bernard, let me start by asking you, is the negative publicity that Facebook has been getting these last weeks and months simply the price you pay for having more than 3 billion customers?
They are not customers, they are users. The customers of Facebook are the people paying for advertising and spreading advertising. And for users, the relationship with Facebook is tense. And what is obvious now is that the bad publicity about Facebook is beginning to scare or to be dangerous for the investors. And there has been a movement in the stock market about Facebook yesterday, and that's a beginning. And what we all know now is that the status quo about Facebook cannot be sustainable in the long run. So for investors, which are basically the only ones that are scaring Facebook executives, those are beginning to be wary about Facebook.
Okay, and it sounds to me, Fabrice, like we could be seeing what some are calling, and this isn't my own language, this is language used at the congressional hearing earlier this month, the big tobacco moment of truth for social media titans like Facebook. Do you agree?
It sounds a little bit like a déjà vu. I've heard this song when the Cambridge Analytica scandal popped up, and that was quite a few years ago. So let's hope this one will be the big tobacco moment, because this time we definitely know that this is a very dangerous company for democracy, for children, for many people around the world, and it has to be stopped at any price.
Stephen, I mean, this, as we just heard there from Fabrice, this big tobacco comparison is quite relevant because, of course, the tobacco giants were accused back in the day of knowing and pretending they didn't know about the dangers posed by cigarettes and tobacco products. Now we know that Facebook knows that what they're doing is potentially toxic and dangerous for children, and they seem to be in denial.
Yeah, not to scare your viewers, but I actually think the problem is far bigger than that. I think that if you could push a button today and Facebook were vanished off the map, the problem would be no less significant for all of us. Part of it is the internet, which has not been around very long. You know, those of us who carry iPhones need to remember that all of these devices and all of this connectivity is in its infancy, and it's being used for harm more than good in many ways. And the problem is Facebook, Reddit, YouTube, Weebly, Gab. If you were to make Facebook go away, in some ways it would be harder to solve because it would go to smaller networks that are in some ways much more vicious, purposefully vicious.
Okay, so it's a more fragmented market, it's sort of a game of whack-a-mole, really. If you got rid of one social media giant, there'd be others that took its place. Alison, let me turn to you. The perception of Facebook has changed enormously, hasn't it, over the last decade? I mean, I remember thinking of Facebook as being a rather sort of benevolent outfit that put you in touch with old friends and gave you the ability to share your status if there was a disaster or an accident. That image, that branding has been damaged perhaps irreparably, hasn't it?
I think it has. You know, we know that several brands, not just tech brands like Facebook, but any company that betrays the trust that you put in them as a user or publisher or consumer or advertising agency buying media, you know, as soon as that trust is betrayed and they don't deliver on the promise, or the promise gets diverted or twisted, absolutely we lose faith in that brand. And brands are built on trust. You know, I've spent 30 years helping companies build their brands and advising them on this. And they need to be extremely careful. And to be honest, it starts at the top. You know, the leadership of these businesses that wobble or perhaps fail or lose our trust, fundamentally, it's down to the decisions of the leaders in these businesses and the cultures monsters that they create. So I think that it isn't such a mystery.
Fabrice, do you agree that Bernard, do you agree that the buck stops with Mark Zuckerberg?
That's a very special company about the leadership and the governance of the company, which is highly impersonated by the leader. And he has indeed a majority of the shares. But it's not that only. He is the one taking the heavy decisions. Look back at Trump when he was deplatformed by Facebook. The advisory board was supposed to take the decision or to orient the decision. He didn't. He said it's Mark Zuckerberg only that has to take that decision, and he did. And basically, all the political decisions that such a giant is making are made by him. The DNA of the company, and that's the DNA itself at this moment, which is under scrutiny by the regulators and lawmakers and so on. And that's very difficult to change. We know that the DNA of such companies, especially when they are so large, with so high expectation from the shareholders, it's very difficult to change. At this moment, that's the dilemma which is happening. Is it possible to change? Will it has to be broken into several parts between Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, and so on? Or are there other measures that has to be taken to regulate the algorithms of the company and the newsfeed especially? That's the real question for the time being. And now we have an administration in the US with Tim Hu at the White House and Lina Khan at FTC, which are highly motivated against those companies. It changes a lot. The landscape, the political landscape has been changing a lot. And we can also say that all the major regions in the world, Europe included, France included, are now highly motivated to act against those companies, to become highly politically dangerous. Not only, that's what Fabrice was saying, they are not only economical giants, they are politically toxic, which is new. Never IBM nor Microsoft were so politically influential.
Yes, Microsoft.
A little bit. But now we have companies which are able to disrupt the democracy itself. That's what Frances Haugen was saying in the audition at the Senate hearing. Basically, it's that is very new. And when states are confronted to enemies in their core competencies, in their core functions, they react very, very severely. That's what we have been saying for Facebook when they created and they attempted to create the new money, the new cryptocurrency, Libra, which was blocked by states almost a few days after it was
because this is uncharted territory. I mean, our leaders are trying to do catch-up with something that's growing so fast and has grown so fast. Difficult to know where to begin with that catch-up operation, isn't it, Fabrice?
We have a major problem with Facebook, and every country has a major problem with Facebook. Recently, when we talk about French matter, we are withdrawing from Mali, and Barkhane is withdrawing from Mali. And if you look closely at what happened there was the Russian troll army, the same one that was instrumental in Trump's election, who was operating in Mali to grow a French resentment within the population that led to Russia replacing French in Mali. And if you look closely at all this, among the shareholders of this Russian troll army is the same guy that is also a shareholder in the Wagner Group. So this is a major, major problem because Facebook is in the middle of all that. This probably would have never happened if Facebook wasn't there. And that's just a small country in the world with geopolitical affair. It's the same problem worldwide. So Facebook is really ruining the state's business. And states like France should react very violently.
Sure. And let me just turn back to you, Alison, because, I mean, we were just talking there about Mark Zuckerberg and does or doesn't the buck stop with him? I mean, let's face it, the guy was 19 years old when he took the reins of Facebook. He's never had another job, never worked in another sector. I mean, is he really up to the job of policing his own network that's got these 3 billion plus users?
Well, I think if we go back to scrutinizing corporate leaders, just because he was 19, we ought to also consider what happened when he was at Harvard and when it was the Facebook and the Winklevoss twins who took Mark Zuckerberg to court ultimately, claiming that it was their idea that he took and commercialized and made money with their intellectual property. So one of the things we need to question about brands, such as this brand, is back to this point about the loss of trust. The leader has demonstrated, even from that age of 18 or 19, what the intent and the character is of Mark Zuckerberg. But as the leader of a business, the question is, do the staff trust his leadership? And now, do the regulators or potential regulators, do we on this panel trust Mark Zuckerberg to do what he says he's going to do? The track record isn't very compelling. We've heard, obviously, from my fellow panelists about Cambridge Analytica, about the Libra, cryptocurrency. And so there is a pattern here that does make you wonder whether the leadership characteristics, the values, the honesty, the transparency, does this all stack up to be able to place bets on a company like Facebook that it is honorable and it is going to comply legally with its obligations? It's not looking too good.
Absolutely. And Stephen, you wanted to jump in. Go ahead.
Yeah. Let me try defending Zuckerberg for a second.
There should be one.
Well, here's why I would say this. I mean, whether you agree with him or not, I think that his speeches that he's given at Harvard and various places about connecting the world and making the world a connected place, I don't think he's turned into singularly a money grubbing financier. I mean, he's wealthy as Crodius. So it would cost him nothing to say, here are the keys. I'm stepping down. I'm going to go, build a philanthropy, and So what I think, if I get inside his head, and you can all disagree with me, I think he says these technologies are out. They're good. They're going to exist on the planet going forward, whether or not Facebook is the leader in them. And I am the best person to figure out this intractable problem of how to create civility and a conversation. I think he thinks he's trying to solve a big problem.
Okay, you've had the last word of the first half, Stephen. We're going to have to leave it there. We're taking a very quick break, and we'll be right back in just a moment. Welcome back to part two of the France 24 debate. Today we're talking about Facebook, the social media giant, which began this week announcing more than $9 billion in quarterly profits on Monday. That's despite the fact that the company has been facing a deluge of scathing reports. Well, in recent days, there's been another Facebook whistleblower who's come forward. Let's listen to what Brian Boland, who worked for the company for 11 years, had to say in an interview with the network CBS.
I became convinced that Facebook was causing harm in the world and causing division in the world. And I tried and I couldn't change it, that I couldn't be a part of it. That Facebook causes divisions in a lot of areas, political being one of them, and a powerful one that we feel viscerally, but also in race and ethnicity, religion.
Okay, Brian Boland speaking there about one of the things he was obliged to, made him want to leave the company, saying that he saw Facebook as a force for bad, causing harm in the world. Well, just before the break, we were talking about the CEO of Facebook, who obviously launched and took control of the company at the age of just 19. And I just wanted to ask you here in the studio, Bernard, let me ask you, does Zuckerberg put ad revenue before every other consideration?
That's the only conclusion we can have from the last few years. And basically, the measures that could have lowered the divisiveness of the platform and the risks of the platform have always been discarded because they would diminish the revenues. That's strategy that was possible for a company without the kind of clout and power they have over the market and over democracies and regimes. Now, it's not something that can be allowed to last for a long time.
We were saying just before the break, you were mentioning, as we were hearing, a defense of Mark Zuckerberg, that perhaps he has got some motivations, some political motivations. What were you suggesting?
Definitely has some political motivations. During the Trump mandate, he went on a tour who was really looking like a political tour within the United States. And at the end of his tour, he's decided to change Facebook algorithm, going from pages to groups and to friends who you have close relationship to friends who are close geographically to you, to produce your newsfeed. And this had tremendous impact on the world. In France, that's how the Gilets jaunes break out. So, and in Chile, there was lots of ousting, and there were breakouts all over the world. That's the kind of power Facebook has. That's the kind of power Mark Zuckerberg likes. And you have to take into account that Mark Zuckerberg, most close friend and advisor is Peter Thiel, who was Donald Trump's closest advisor, and who's also the founder of Palantir, who is, how can you put that, the NSA's best toy. So you have a surveillance industry very close to Mark Zuckerberg. You have Donald Trump very close to Mark Zuckerberg, and you have Peter Thiel and Steve Bannon, mostly Peter Thiel, very close to Mark Zuckerberg, who's also an advisor to the, how do you say that, Conseil d'administration?
Administration.
Well, anyway, he is among the big decision maker within Facebook. And those guys... Advisory body. And those guys have a very clear political view on how the world should be ruled. You should definitely read Peter Thiel's book to have an idea of what Mark Zuckerberg is doing with Facebook on a political view. And if you read those books, Mark Zuckerberg's way of using Facebook in a political manner is totally clear and effective. And he's doing a great job in the views of Peter Thiel.
Let me ask Alison. Alison, you're American. Does Mark Zuckerberg have a political agenda in your opinion?
I don't think so. I think Mark Zuckerberg has a very clear commercial agenda. And I don't know that he has any particular allegiance as long as the company's share price keeps going up, that revenues per quarter keep going up, that usage keeps going up. So I don't know that that's even, I wouldn't necessarily, well, I don't know, but I would speculate that, no, I don't think that's a motivation.
Okay. Stephen, I mean, we've been talking about, we've been hearing in recent weeks reports about what's deemed to be dangerous content, that Facebook should have done more to put the lid on. I'm talking about anti-vax groups, people, in particular, let's talk about anti-vax groups, I mean, that have used Facebook as a platform to get their message across. I mean, is it Facebook's job to shut down a conversation if people want to have that conversation?
Well, you're asking an excellent question. I thought you were going to say the January 6th organization, because in some ways I think that's going to be easy. But that I think is going to be a little bit brighter line and easier to hang on them with very little dispute. I mean, if they facilitated the organization of an insurrection, there may be no turning back from that. The problem with the anti-vax conversation is that there's this very blurry line between reasonable conversations about, hey, what should I do for my health, and which vaccine do I trust? And then all vaccines will kill you, and they're trying to insert a tracking chip in your arm. And no, I think Facebook did a terrible job of drawing that line, and it could have been drawn a lot quicker and a lot more brightly than it was.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there is, as it has been mentioned by Stephen, a very thin line, but at this moment, the elements of appreciation, of research about the reactions of people about Facebook, the kids having bad image about their bodies with Instagram, the people being forced to be more divisive, more hardcore in their opinions, because it's what makes them more like and share the views on the platform, that there is a new name about that. It's called ampliganda. It's contraction between amplification and propaganda. The real problem, you mentioned the First Amendment and the American Constitution. It's not about free speech anymore. It's about freedom of reach, freedom of sending to hundreds of millions some opinions that in the past were only in cafes or restaurants or family homes. And now that's the power that Facebook has, is to influence millions or billions, because the algorithm is amplifying those comments, those opinions, in ways that they are the only ones to know. The secrecy about the algorithm of Facebook newsfeed, for example, is something that is not going to last if, and I guess they are, governments are influencing the policy of Facebook in the future, because basically it's anti-democratic by nature.
Okay, you want to jump in?
There's another problem. I mean, the First Amendment is pretty cool for Americans, but Facebook is acting like one size fits all. There's nothing like the First Amendment in France. There is no free speech in France. If you strongly believe that white people are superior to black people, it is totally legal to say that in France. If you are anti-Semitic, it is totally legal to say that in France. There is nothing like the First Amendment in France. And the First Amendment is being pushed all over the place. In France, in Tunisia, in every country, they had, with Facebook, built in not only the First Amendment, but the way American society defines society as a melting pot of communities. In France also, the communities, the way of building a society as communities living with each other, is not the way France sees itself as a country. And this has been profoundly destroying France, but many other countries.
And there has been issues about, for example, India, where the platform, the Facebook platform, was used to increase the tension between different ethnic communities, and even worse, in Burma, where they were accused to lead to violent action against some minorities. So they have a very bad track record. We can say that.
Let's ask Stephen to jump in at this stage. I mean, is Facebook trying to shoehorn the First Amendment into countries where it simply doesn't belong?
Well, but I want to just go back one step, because the problems that everyone just described, I think, are spot on. But realistically, if you know anything about technology and you think about what an algorithm is, I mean, the thing that runs Facebook is this black box. And I have plenty of friends at senior management there that will tell you they put things into it and they have virtually no idea what's going to come out the other side. So if you think about these complicated political discussions, you know, how do you build a piece of code that can say, this conversation is reasonable, this is a balanced, thoughtful conversation, and this conversation is unreasonable and it's damaging? It's impossible. And
there are,
that's why you don't play with viruses, for example, because it's dangerous. So you don't play with that. And it's illegal in most countries to play with viruses, to create new viruses, because technically you can. Yeah. You totally can.
So computer viruses.
Let's let Stephen finish, because he's got the disadvantage of being by a satellite. Stephen, go ahead.
I have an optimistic thought, or maybe at least a little bit of a window into a solution, which is, I think the real thing that we need to be starting to think about around the world is about consumer control of data.
Not enough.
Because that, to me, if you look at GDPR as the first ping in that space, that actually had meaningful global change. And it didn't come from the States.
Sure, let's just listen. I just want to play a clip of the Facebook whistleblower, Frances Haugen, because she said something that I've been hearing around this table as well, which is that Facebook simply doesn't have the systems in place to target some of the content that we've been talking about. Let's listen now to Frances Haugen again.
Facebook's own research says they cannot adequately identify dangerous content. And as a result, those dangerous algorithms that they admit are picking up the extreme sentiments, the division. They can't protect us from the harms that they know exist in their own system.
Okay, the whistleblower saying they can't police themselves. They don't have the means to do it. Alison, I just want to ask you, I mean, what we've been hearing from Facebook the last couple of weeks. Has it sounded to you more like defending choices or taking action?
Or perhaps both. So I think the first thing I've been hearing is that it's trying to, suggest that the two whistleblowers now, Frances Haugen and the gentleman that you just showed the clip from a few minutes ago, it's trying to discredit them. They didn't work here very long. They didn't really get access to the full context of how our business works. So I think, an attempted defense of, shoot the messenger isn't really a very strong defense. I think one of the things we also know, if you go back through, the argument about algorithms and they're out of our control now, we've created a Frankenstein that is taking over the business. Let's not forget that it wasn't that long ago that Facebook did an experiment with its users without their permission by feeding them two different types of news feeds, seeing their behavior on the back of positive news feeds for one population and then, negative news feeds for another to see what they did thereafter. Now, doing psychological experiments requires intent and it requires some degree of algorithms and AI. So I don't know that the public fully buy this idea that we've created this giant black box and it's now completely out of control and we don't know what to do with it next. I'm not sure if we all believe that.
We definitely created monster, and it's called AI. AI, which is in fact deep learning. It's a small part of AI, but deep learning is basically an algorithm that is going to learn based on data. So there's no way you can really understand how it works. It's not like, x equal 2 times z plus 2. It's not the usual algorithm you learn at school. It's very much more complex, and it's not something you can really predict how it's going to work and how it's going to react. That's why you have lots of, for example, racial bias or gender bias in those algorithms, because basically they're using data. And you're going to find within this data the same gender bias that is going to be reproduced by those algorithms. So we definitely did create monster by putting AI all over the place. And in some areas, like social networking, it is extremely dangerous. It's much less dangerous when you use this on Netflix because Netflix is also going to use this kind of algorithm to recommend you some movie.
Right. Sometimes they're spot on, sometimes they're really not.
Sometimes they're not, but the more you use it, the more they're going to be efficient. But when it comes to Facebook, it is definitely very, very dangerous. And I think that in those kind of areas, it should be forbidden.
Yeah.
Okay, Stephen, jump in. Go ahead.
I love what you just said. What you're saying is essentially Facebook is the Terminator, only minus the body of Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah, not exactly. Not exactly. No, if I may.
By the way, there may be some truth to that.
No, if I may, there is something that could be done very easily, and that could reduce some of the divisive content. At this moment, billions, I said not millions, but billions of fake accounts are erased by Facebook every 2 or 3 months. And in last quarter of 2020, it was 1.3 billion fake accounts. At this moment, Facebook makes all the platform easy to create those fake accounts with fake photos, even from AI, as you mentioned, creating false faces for new and fake accounts, creating barriers not to create so easily so many fake accounts at one time could be simply a measure of good sense. But at this time, they don't want to do it because they would prevent legitimate users, not customers, to use the platform, and they don't want that. Everything that can reduce the engagement, especially for the youngers, because they are losing the young. Now Facebook is something for the old.
Exactly. We're going to move right on to that this moment. I just want to pick up on one thing before we move on to this subject of the young increasingly turning their backs on Facebook. Alison, I just want to ask you, Facebook says it's planning to do a bit of a rebranding, a bit of a refresh of its look and image. I mean, what's your reading into that? What are they trying to achieve, do you think?
Well, it's a topical procedure when you actually have quite a lot of tumors, quite a few tumors going on under the skin. And putting, a cream on something that runs deep is not going to cure the patient, and the patient is sick. And there are a number of ways to fix this patient, and that is not one of them.
Yeah, well, let's listen to what, moving on to some of what these younger people think about this idea of rebranding. Some of them say it's just a publicity stunt and perhaps too little, too late.
Young people define Facebook as the old people's app. I think the choice to change name is more a publicity stunt, more of an attention-seeking attempt than a consequence of the latest scandals. It seems more like an attempt by Facebook to renew itself.
What could be a good alternative name?
An alternative name could be the old people's app, because that's how young people call it.
Facebook will change its name. I'll say it to you in Calabrian dialect. The face of shame. The face of shame.
An appropriate new name for Facebook? How about Spybook? We're not big users of Facebook, I must say.
Okay, so that was just some people in different cities around you, well, Rome and Berlin in particular, giving their opinions about Facebook. Stephen, I mean, not altogether flattering. How's Facebook going to win back its young users?
It's not.
It's not.
I mean, they're already on Instagram, and now they're moving to TikTok. I don't think young users go back. I just don't think it happens.
What do you think?
I think they could win that back with Metaverse, which is basically
the new project.
Virtual reality, immersive virtual reality stuff. And the thought about Facebook being a leader in Metaverse is terrifying.
Yeah.
Because this is probably going to be the next big thing. And if we get ourselves virtually in a real universe, not just in front of a screen, but with 3D and total immersion in a virtual universe, and this is ruled by Facebook, God knows what will happen to us.
You
are terrifying.
Yeah, I completely agree on that. The idea that the next Skynet, because we were talking about Terminator, the next Skynet would be run by the actual leadership of Facebook is something really
scary. It is
scary.
Actually already run, because basically there are some connection between Palantir, which is Skynet, and Facebook.
Palantir is a small Skynet.
Well, it's a beginning.
Yeah,
and it's an
important big data about terrorism and security around the world.
About anything.
Which is used by all the agencies, not only NSA.
NSA, CIA, FBI, local
joint
sheriff
chief of
office,
staff,
everybody.
And including in France, with the interior security
France,
services. So, indeed, I'm not completely sure, to be honest, that the Metaverse initiative by Facebook is real, because let's remember that Facebook bought Oculus VR in 2014.
Oh, yeah.
7 years ago.
7 years ago.
So they didn't do it. So is it topical, as our guest were saying, is it topical to talk about it, to divert the attention, to deflect the attention to something else, like the rebranding itself, could be seen as a way to deflect from bad publicity on the core Facebook brand? That's my question at this moment.
Okay, well, you've had the last word, because I'm being told we're out of time. So thank you very much indeed. Bernard Benhamou, Secretary General of the Institute of Digital Sovereignty. Thank you very much to you. Thank you as well, entrepreneur and teacher Fabrice Epelboin from London. Alison Stewart-Allen, marketing and branding expert. Thank you very much to you. And thank you as well to Stephen Rosenbaum in New York, Executive Director of the New York City Media Lab. Thank you to all of you. Thanks to you for watching. Do stay tuned to France 24.